Welcome back to the second week of whatever this is that we're doing right now. This is our second video lecture. This one is going to be a heck of a lot shorter than the first one. I'm kind of tired of doing monologues for you all the time. Some of you might have been wondering why we had to go through all of that. There's a lot of admin that I had to go through last time that we don't have to cover this time. This time here, I'm just focusing on the lecture component, one concept that I really need you to get down pat for the concluding section of your work. And otherwise, I am just going to lay out a little bit of the admin stuff in terms of what assignments are due in the next couple of weeks. Then we're done. So my hope is that this is like a 15-20 minute, that's it. The big concept that we need to cover right off the bat are conclusions. Conclusions are one of those things that people have been taught one way of doing them, and it makes for a really complicated and unpractical or impractical way of communicating information in a conclusion. So we're going to cover a lot of that in this PowerPoint here, and I also have a handout that I'm going to post to the class materials section under content so that you have that resource too to just kind of play around with this. If you'll remember that template that I talked about, and a lot of you will already be working with this template for the technical report, whether you're doing the draft or the outline, it's the same template. There's a section at the bottom of that says conclusion and recommendations. I want you to start thinking about the conclusion section as a section in itself. It's not a single paragraph where you summarize a bunch of stuff that you just told me and then you move on. Instead, this is a section where you can actually put forth your ideas and draw conclusions from what you just told me. So what can I do with this information, and how can we take this information and have a better understanding of the world around us? Because if nothing else, you've put together this project, you've done a really good job of gathering your sources and discussing it with me. Now you have one last opportunity to leave me with something that I'm going to take away that's going to be a benefit to my understanding of your subject. I can't remember everything that you've put into your paper. It's not possible for me to do that. I have like 100 of you. And I just got a whole other section of COMM1085 here because of this COVID stuff. So I have even more students now that I'm trying to work with. I want to learn from you. And one of the places where you can really drive home that learning in terms of your project, that you can make it memorable, is in the conclusion. So we're going to jump right into that now. The first thing that I really want to draw your attention to here are the misconceptions and the facts that are behind them. So the big thing that I want to draw your attention to is this notion that conclusions are summaries of what your paper says. If we had done this in class, I would have gotten you to kind of talk to me about what a conclusion is in the first place. And almost inevitably, you would have told me, well, it's where you summarize your points. You say in conclusion, then you move on, which both are bullshit. I want you to step well beyond summary. I just read your paper. For some of you, that might be 4 pages. For some of you, that might be 5 pages. Some of you, that might be 6 pages. For others, it might be anywhere between 8 and 10 pages. Why would I want to have a whole other page or paragraph that literally just tells me exactly what I just read? If you didn't make it clear in the first 6 pages, what makes you think that that final paragraph is going to save you in any way, shape, or form? Instead, you might need to summarize a couple of the core points, like just bring them up as discussion points. But I want you to now take those points and build them into something that the reader can think about. So what does the reader do with those points now that you've presented them to that reader? The second misconception that you have is that the thesis must be restated. So often we end up talking about how the conclusion is literally just the inverse of your introduction in the 5-paragraph format. when you're talking about how you start with your thesis restated, you put your 3 points or whatever that is. We've already debunked all of that anyway. And then you work your way to something narrow that ends with a catchy little quote or something like that that makes it all cute. It's where the George Washington or the Winston Churchills come back into play. We're not doing that. Your main point should be clear by then. What I want you to be able to do is now take this particular thesis and show me what the implications of that are. So what does this mean for us? And what do you want me to learn from the argument that you just presented? It's very similar to that first point I just made. The last thing that really grinds my gears is this idea that providing meaning requires new information of some sort. That's not true. This is most evident for those of you who haven't done your research. So what I often get are those people who are slackers who didn't do the research when they needed to, and now they're scrambling at the end. They'll put together a whole paper, they'll talk about it really well, but they won't put their sources in there. Then they'll get to the conclusion and go, oh shit, I need sources. So I'm going to just drop my sources into the conclusion and hope for the best. That's not going to save you. You need to put them into the actual document. You need to be able to talk with them, analyze them. The source material is what's going to prompt your analysis. Plain and simple. We've talked about this for weeks now. So what I need you to be able to do is not necessarily present new information in terms of source material. I need you to instead look at what we can do and what we can conclude from the information you have presented. The conclusions and recommendations should be their own section. Goodbye, big summaries of your work with in conclusion at the beginning. Nobody talks like that. So think about it this way. You don't get to the end of a conversation with a friend or even a colleague or somebody that you're arguing with and go, well, in conclusion, I believe this. That's just not a thing. Like, we don't talk like that, ever. The other thing is you don't start really broad and then you work your way in, and it's not the inverse of your introduction. Let me give you a quick story. When I was in grade 12, I wrote a conclusion exactly with all the stereotypes we just discussed. Summarized my points. I restated my thesis at the beginning, and I worked my way to something narrow, and I probably threw in my source material there because didn't care. When I got it back, the only comment from the teacher at that time was, well, it seems like your conclusion is just the opposite of your introduction. And it stuck with me to this day because I was like, well, yeah, that was the point. That's what you taught me to do. We're not doing that. So please step beyond it. You have the freedom here to write multiple paragraphs. Think about the way that you're constructing this, not just as one key concluding paragraph, but also a discussion of the rest of your work that brings everything together. The 3 questions that I want you to ask are these. The first is really key. It's similar to what we would deal with in an introduction. It's like your hook. So when you're talking about thesis restated, this is very similar to that. It'll come out more organically if you can answer this in a sentence or 2. What can we learn from this discussion? And then ultimately start thinking about what work is needed beyond this. And we'll talk about what that means as we go through the PowerPoint here. How do you recommend the reader act upon your discussions? So how might we take that information and build upon it? And ultimately, this is very related, but what do you want the reader to take away from the discussion? It's very similar to what can you learn, so they might blend together. But those 2 elements combined with how can we act upon this? What can this tell us about the world? Those things are really crucial. The base of these questions can form the first paragraph of your conclusions or recommendations. But for many of you, a lot of this is actually going to require multiple paragraphs. So don't be afraid to extend that conclusion so that it's actually a section where you analyze stuff too. Okay? Analyze what you told me in the actual paper. I'm going to walk you through a few major characteristics of strong conclusions, but you don't need to know all of these. We're only going to delve into the most salient points in depth. So conclusions push against convention and provide practical, actionable ideas. We'll get into that. You don't have to push against convention as in like, oh, I'm completely changing the conversation, but you should be able to present me with something new about the conversation that I didn't know before. You don't want to summarize. You might use anecdotes and discussions from your data, but we're not really going to focus on that in depth because I don't think it's necessary for you at this level. You might highlight upcoming challenges. There might be something that we're going to struggle with going forward. That's good to mention because then we can be prepared based on the information you've provided. Solutions have to make sense. Like a lot of you in your proposals are suggesting, oh, well, I'm going to suggest different solutions to this. And often what I get are these solutions that are totally off base, like they don't make any sense whatsoever, or they're very basic in the sense of, oh, we need to conserve water. It's like, well, thanks, but we've been telling people that for years and we haven't gotten anywhere. Or, oh, you shouldn't litter. Like, why not? Obviously not, but people don't care. Or more relevant to today, you should stay inside. And there are still people going, why? I might need another package of toilet paper because who knows? I could run out after going through 48 packs that I've already purchased. You want to end with a very direct message, and that's where the what can we learn from this, or what do you want the reader to take away from the discussion comes in. And the conclusions should give us a way of acting, like we should be able to act upon them. So we'll talk about all of this kind of as we go through here. I'm going to go through them fairly quickly. You can come back to them on your own time if you need, and we can also just chat about this via email or in a Zoom meeting if you so choose. Your conclusion should provide something actionable, and this goes from the last point we just discussed. This is your last opportunity to tell me to act a certain way based on the information you gave me, or to think a different way about the information you gave me. So if you're doing a historical overview of something, then by all means, you can just tell me this information can help you in these ways. Knowing this history can actually do this. If you're providing me with a glimpse into the future, then perhaps this is where you look 5, 10, 25 years into the future. And you're like, this is what you can do to prepare for that future and be on the cusp of things. Just as an example, a lot of public discussions now and a lot of research discussions are all about how can you impact the public. So one thing that really intrigues me is the fact that in the future, a lot of us are going to need to know at least basic coding, just for everyday life. Having that basic understanding of coding in the background and the technology that we have is going to give us so many more ways to play with ideas and to play with the technology that we're given. So those public discourses are going to find their way into education, both formally and informally, and we're going to have to find ways to act on them. So you want actionable ideas that we can work with. Okay? As the slide decides not to advance, we also have, you don't want to summarize. We've already covered this quite in depth, but you want to focus on the ideas you've presented me, and you want to tell me what to do with them. Like, what benefit do they have to me? What can I conclude from the ideas that you presented? If I wanted you to just summarize what you just told me, I would ask you to just put a note and say, hey, go to the conclusion. You don't need to read the rest of my crap because, well, most of it's summarized at the end. I want you to be able to tell me something about those ideas instead of summarizing, okay? There might be challenges. A lot of you are going to have challenges that you foresee. Some of you are actually talking about this coronavirus. My gosh, do you know how many challenges that still face us with that? This is a great opportunity to take a paragraph or two and maybe outline those challenges and build those into possible solutions. This is all for the concluding section. You also have to understand that no project that we can ever do, this includes me writing projects or writing research papers and all that stuff, or you doing a paper for this class, we can't cover it all. There's no way. As we talked about earlier this semester, people spend entire careers just touching the surface of some of these topics. So you can present your limitations. What are some limitations that you have, and then what can we learn from those limitations? What are challenges that we might have? You might have circumstantial limitations, as in you didn't have enough time to do this or that. You can list that and you can just mention, you know what, this would be a good area for future research or future discussions. And I want you to develop realistic solutions. We're going to cover this in the next slide here, but you really need to be able to develop solutions that are going to just be practical. Give me something that I can work with. None of this feel-good kumbaya stuff that's going to just, well, if you do this, the world's going to be better. It's like, that's not the way it's going to work. The world is complicated. You need to provide me with a couple of small, actionable solutions that we could use. Make it useful for people. Don't make it hopeless, but also don't make it pie in the sky. If we all band together and care for one another, we're going to make the world a better place. Yes, we will. Is that going to happen? History says that no. So what are certain smaller ways that we might be able to act on this? The more practical your solutions, the easier it's going to be for you to communicate that. What do you want me to take away? I want you to end with a clear, direct message. We call this ending on a crescendo. So like at the end of a symphony or at the end of a fireworks show, you don't want things to just like peter out. You want like the whole shebang. Fireworks displays are the best. Sometimes the finale is awesome and you remember those. However, you equally remember the ones where it was like, really, that was it? You want things to be clear, direct, and really communicate your message. As in, this is the last chance you have to tell me something. Okay? Give me something I can buy into. Is it feel good, or does it actually give me something to do? I don't want you to be cute. I want you to be realistic and practical. And we don't have to agree on what you conclude. We don't have to agree on anything if you don't want to. I think the goal here, instead of us all agreeing and being in a nice fuzzy little world, is that maybe we have a little bit of controversy or problems that we can't overcome, but you've offered me a really good way of thinking through those things. So I'm going to get out of this slideshow for a minute, and I want to go to this writing conclusions document. I'm going to post this under class materials, which is under content. At the top, you're going to have these misconceptions, and you're going to have the 3 questions. And I've given you one example. It doesn't have the other paragraphs that are talking about recommendations and all that. You will have to add those. But this is just one example of how a former student in COMM1085 dealt with this. She was talking about women participating in STEM subjects. And at that time, the college was putting on a big campaign to increase women in not only STEM subjects, but the trades. And as most of you are aware, it didn't work all that well, but, you know, we're coming. Instead, she was looking at, okay, how can we look at this practically? So she answered each of these questions in 1 or 2 sentences. And that built into a larger concluding paragraph here. And this concluding paragraph then would build into some recommendations for the future. How can we act on this? All those questions. But those major points were covered in the first component. Then she built into, or she would have built into, the recommendations component, the solutions to all of this. And she would have ended with a really good platform for me to jump off of. So this will be available for you online just to kind of start thinking through the conclusion. There's a lot of information coming at you, I understand. Please email me if you're going to, or if you're struggling to figure all of this out. I'm totally willing to work with you on this. The sooner that you get this together, especially for the outline, the better. The next slide is talking to us just about remembering the fact that conclusions are often overlooked because they just summarize. They tell me nothing. But if you really take advantage of this as an opportunity to teach me something, to leave me with something, then you're going to be in a much better place to leave me with a final message. And it's also going to affect your grade because the last thing I read is the thing that you want me to retain. And I often remember those papers that focus in and that give me those tangible reasons for acting upon their work. We didn't always agree, but it was quite good. And I was able to understand and learn from that person. That's what I'm looking for. So enough of all that. If you need me, I'm available via email. There's two things that are due in our immediate future here. The comprehensive outline or the draft of your paper, either one. If you don't know what I'm talking about, watch the previous video because it's all in there. And I also left a note both in your email and on the course page. It's due on Friday. Do a draft, do the outline, whatever one you want. I will give you credit for it. I want it to be as complete as possible so I can give you the best possible feedback. It's due Friday the 27th. My hope is that I can get you feedback by the 31st or April 1st, which still gives you 8 or 9 days to get the final product amended and in a good spot before Good Friday. And then you're pretty well done with this course other than a couple of administrative things. Quiz 5 is also open. It'll be open until April the 5th. It's kind of a repeat of a lot of the material we've already covered. I will be migrating some information into class materials just so you have it available for the multiple guests. But again, like all our other quizzes this semester, it's mostly based on the short answer that comes after. That's where most of your grades come from. So you read the article, you answer questions about the article, I give you grade. Focus on those elements. It's not complicated. The reading is found under course content, course information, and then it's in the instructional plan. So you can even just control F this to find it. It's called Go Beyond the Equity Handbook. It's by Riley Yesno. If I'm being honest, it's arguably the worst one this semester. It's not great, but it's there. Just get this one done. For just overall purposes, the top 4 grades that you have for quizzes count towards the final grade. The lowest one drops. So if you've done well on all of your quizzes and you don't want to do quiz 5, you don't have to. But if you want to pad your grade, or if you didn't do well on a previous quiz that you want to now make up for on quiz 5, please do this quiz so that we can kind of get your grade as high as we can, at least in terms of the administrative stuff. If you have questions about any of this, my email's open. We can Zoom. Until next week, happy writing. Enjoy whatever you're doing at home, Netflix, eating, whatever. And please be in touch if you have any issues. Talk to you guys later.